Chapter 6. Dark Mirror.
Latin had something of divine punishment about it. Not the picturesque kind with thunderbolts and dramatic speeches, but the slow, dragging sort of penance, where you declined the same words for so long they stopped meaning anything at all. Professor Sterling was writing yet another set of forms for the verb faire on the board. The chalk squeaked precisely whenever someone in the room was trying to fall asleep.
Pharaoh fares furt, the class recited without conviction.
Matt sat in one of the back rows by the window. The glass was cold. He leaned his forehead against it for a moment, then pulled away, leaving a misty smudge. He had taken nothing from his bag except a sheet of notepaper, and that remained blank.
It was easier to look straight ahead. More precisely, at one particular point ahead. The back of Rose Hartley's head was the definition of order. Her hair was pinned into a low bun, not a single strand escaping the grip of her hairpins. The uniform sat on her as if it had been tailored, not handed out in bulk. She sat upright, hardly touching the back of her chair. He wondered whether it was her spine or the awareness that someone might note classroom deportment in a report that held her that straight. Her notebook was open, and her pen moved across it in an even, quick line. Matt could see the tiny letters multiplying in the margin. Pharaoh fares furt thudded in his ears like a mantra. His own pen sat between his fingers, touching nothing. He just tapped it against the edge of the desk to a rhythm that had nothing to do with Latin. The effort she put in was physically irritating, like an itch under a cast, like realizing someone was playing a different game entirely, more serious, more desperate, and not even trying to hide it.
Mr. Whitby, Sterling's voice cut across the room. Perhaps you can remind us what Pharaoh means.
A few heads turned. Rose's did not. She bent further over her notes instead. Matt looked up. I carry, he said without hesitation, or I endure, depending on which answer you'd rather hear.
Something like the ghost of a smile tugged at Sterling's mouth.
For the sake of our syllabus, we shall stick to I carry, he said. The rest is a matter of personal interpretation. Like everything, Matt muttered too quietly for the teacher to hear. He looked back at Rose. She was writing in the margin faster than the professor dictated. He recognized that kind of note-taking. Those weren't just grammatical constructions. They were comments, hooks, little anchors to catch the sense when revising. He had once written like that himself, before he understood that you could learn every form of every verb and still have no influence on any of the things that mattered. The professor moved between the desks, correcting someone's stress on a syllable, someone else's macron. When he passed Rose's row, he paused and leaned over her notebook. "Very good, Miss Hartley," he said. "Give the rest of the declensions the same care." The "very good" landed like a stamp. Matt felt something boil. He had heard those words before. In a different room, in a different context, with different consequences. Rose nodded without looking up. She took the praise as something obvious but not light, like a load she was expected to keep carrying.
Pharaoh, he thought. I carry. She carried it all quite visibly. Marks, expectations, the Cavendish Grant, her own guilt from the past, guilt she might not even fully understand. The fact she did it so openly infuriated and fascinated him in equal measure.
He glanced out of the window. The tree branches outside bent under the wind. The rain had not yet started, but the clouds hung low and heavy. "Mr. Whitby," Sterling's voice came again. Since we have established that pharaoh means I carry, perhaps you could give us an example sentence." He could have said something from the textbook. Puer libros fert. The boy carries books. Simple, correct, safe. Filius nomen suum fert, he said instead. The son carries his name.
A few people snickered, not entirely sure what, if anything, was supposed to be funny. Rose froze for the briefest moment. Her pen hovered above the page.
The teacher regarded him. "Grammatically correct," he conceded. "Stylistically debatable." "Debate is the heart of education," Matt said, leaning back in his chair. When the lesson ended, pupils began shoving books into bags. Rose packed her things with the same care she used when writing, each notebook in its place, pen in the same pocket as always. Matt watched her slide Horace into her bag, straighten her collar before putting on her jacket. Everything about her was effort pretending to be ease. It annoyed him, but he couldn't look away.
The corridor after Latin smelled of chalk and damp coats. Pupils poured out of the rooms like water from a cracked pipe. Someone laughed over a mangled amour. Someone else grumbled about Sterling and his obsession with vowel length.
Caroline waited by the window, hip propped against the sill. She was checking something in a small mirror cupped in her palm, not because she needed to, but because she liked knowing the world saw exactly the version of Caroline she had selected. She spotted Matt before he saw her. He left the classroom last, unhurried, his textbook tucked carelessly under his arm. Someone clapped him on the back. Someone else tossed him a comment he answered with a half smile. The whole little theater. "Whitby!" she called before he could turn toward the stairs. "Running away from me or from the next declension?" He turned. For a fraction of a second there was real recognition on his face, quickly covered by a standard school smile. "Caroline," he said, "I see Latin hasn't managed to kill your enthusiasm for life." "It tried," she said, "but I'm stubborn. Besides, I'm only interested in the present tense, not the pluperfect." He joined her at the window. The corridor around them slowly thinned. Most people were already heading for the dining hall. "How's the return to our little monastery?" she asked, flicking at the cuff of her sleeve. "The school was dreadfully dull without you."
Is that politeness or habit? He raised an eyebrow. Habit, she admitted cheerfully. Politeness isn't really my thing.
He smiled. There was something softer, almost familiar in it.
"I heard you made a social career out of my absence," he said. "Bowls, corridor drama, smuggled wine. I'm proud."
"Someone had to keep standards up," she shrugged. "You didn't leave any worthy successors. Besides," she added, "some of us weren't lucky enough to get a 2-year holiday from St. Oswald's." For a moment, his gaze hardened. "Holiday," he repeated. "Interesting word for a place where the doors lock from the outside." Caroline looked away, out of the window. The rain that had started was leaving crooked paths down the glass. "You know I've never called it that," she said quietly. "You know I wasn't the one who—" She broke off. She didn't need to finish. "The one who reported him." "I know," he said. "You were the only person back then who pretended nothing had changed." Caroline stared at him. "I thought it drove you mad," she confessed. "You were not subtle about your silence." "It did," he said. "But someone feigning normality while everything collapses is strangely comforting." Silence settled for a moment. From the next room came the scrape of chairs. Someone swore in English, someone else in Latin. "Look," Caroline said, snapping back into her usual tone,
I didn't stop you here just so we could reminisce about your glorious past in juvenile detention."
"I suspected as much," he said. "You're too clever for nostalgia."
"Is that a compliment?" She lifted an eyebrow.
"It's a statement," he muttered.
He rested an arm against the wall above her head, leaning in a little. The gesture was familiar, corridor flirtation, but his eyes were elsewhere. Over Caroline's shoulder he could see further down the corridor, Rose leaving another room with a stack of notebooks pressed to her chest.
"What was it like here when I was gone?" he asked suddenly. "With her." Caroline frowned. "With Rose?"
"Mm-hmm." He toyed with his cuff button, playing at indifference. "Just wondering whether the school handled her as thoroughly as it did me."
Caroline hesitated. There was more than curiosity in the question. It didn't sound like the beginning of a revenge plot, more like him checking how much ground he had left under his feet.
"It was different," she said at last. "For a while, people looked at her like a walking form. Report form V." She grimaced. "Then they got used to it, but the distance stayed, and the way they stopped sitting at her table, as if they were afraid she'd start filing reports on them mid-meal."
"And you?" he asked. "Did you sit with her?"
"I've always liked living dangerously," she tried to joke. "Besides," she shrugged, "someone had to ask her about stupid things when everyone else was asking whether she'd turn them in next."
Something flickered across Matt's face, a shadow of relief maybe, or gratitude he had no intention of naming.
"Why do you care, Whitby?" she said suddenly. "How they treated her?"
He had watched Rose too long to pretend it was coincidence. She was closer to the stairs now, outlined against the light from the tall window.
"Because when someone shoves you," he said slowly, "I like to know whether the world helped them or got in the way."
"She didn't shove you," Caroline said at once. "Not in the way that sounds."
"I know," he said, unexpectedly calm. "But paper says one thing, memory another, and people a third. You're closest to the version I care about."
"Which is?" she asked. "What Hartley looks like when no one's watching."
Caroline opened her mouth to joke that exactly the same, just without the uniform, but something in his expression stopped her. For the first time since he'd come back, he didn't sound like a boy hunting for a weak point. He sounded like someone trying to understand what had actually happened between the version from 2 years ago and the one standing now on the stairs.
"She looks tired," Caroline said instead, "like someone who's always counting. Hours, points, percentages. Even her laughter has a column somewhere."
"That fits," he muttered. "She's always had a knack for being a graph."
"Matt," she began, then broke off. "Be careful with all of this. With her. With digging in the past. This isn't another card game."
"It never is," he said, "but everyone here pretends it is." He straightened his tie, which wasn't properly done up anyway. "Don't worry, Caroline. I don't need a Hartley user guide from you. I just wanted to know whether the school turned her into more of a saint or more of a monster."
"Neither," she said. "It turned her into someone with no margin left, not even for stupid mistakes."
She met his eyes.
"A bit like you."
For a moment, something leveled between them. Shared experience of being backed into a corner by an institution that liked to pretend it was offering choice.
"At least that gives us common ground," he said lightly, though there was less irony in his voice than usual. "Thank you for the report, Miss Social Affairs."
"Go, before I start charging for it," she snorted.
As he walked towards the stairs, Caroline watched him with a mix of irritation and something like sorrow. She had known the earlier Matt, the one from before the report, before the correctional school, before Cavendish Grant turned into a sentence. The new one was sharper, but traces of that boy were still there. The one who had once half-joked, half-serious, asked if she could someday teach him to dance, because apparently girls like it when you don't stand on their toes.
Now, watching the way his gaze snagged once more on Rose's figure on the stairs, she thought that perhaps no one here danced carefully anymore.
The summons arrived in the politest form St. Oswald's knew, a white slip pushed under the door bearing a handful of neat words.
Mr. Matthew Whitby, please report to the headmaster's office at 17 to discuss your further educational path. Attendance required. Sir Alastair Whitby has confirmed his presence.
Path sounded harmless, like something you could walk, stop on, turn back from. Matt knew they meant railway tracks. Once you were on, you were meant to sit still and watch the scenery. The headmaster's office lay at the end of the quietest corridor in the school. The walls were lined with photographs of smiling alumni whose careers were highlighted in the glossy brochures. The name Whitby, including his brothers, appeared several times, like a refrain.
The headmaster sat behind his desk, but he was not the main figure in the room. In the armchair by the window, slightly turned to the side, sat his father.
Sir Alastair Whitby looked exactly as he always did. His jacket sat perfectly, his hair was graying only in places that added gravitas, not years. If he smiled, it was a tool, not a reflex.
"Matthew," he said as his son entered, "sit down."
He did not ask how school was, nor how the journey had been. Those things did not belong in the boxes he cared about. Matt took the chair opposite the desk. It had always seemed a fraction too low, as if designed so every pupil would feel smaller here than they were. The headmaster delivered a brief preamble about progress, possible routes after A-levels, the exceptional responsibility borne by a pupil with such a name. Matt listened to half of it. The rest was a remix of speeches he had heard for years.
"The situation is as follows," Sir Alastair said at last, taking over with the ease of someone who was used to taking over companies. "St. Oswald's has given you a second chance. You have used it well enough not to bring us further embarrassment." He paused. "But that is not sufficient."
Matt said nothing. "The Cavendish Grant," his father went on. "It is self-evident it should go to you, not only because of your results, but because of continuity." He glanced at the headmaster, expecting agreement. The headmaster nodded, but carefully. "The committee is considering several candidates," he said. "We are looking not only at grades, but also at contributions to school life, conduct, recommendations." Conduct hung in the air like a charge. Sir Alastair pulled a slim file towards him. Even from here, Matt could see his own name on the spine. "There were incidents," his father said. 2 years ago." He opened the file. "Incidents which cost all of us a great deal of nerves and money." He flicked through a few pages. "And here is the amusing part, Matthew." His smile was brief and humorless. "Every time I try to forget about it, I come across the same name." He turned one sheet so Matt could read it. A fragment of the report.
Following a suggestion by R. Hartley, who reported suspected consumption of alcohol in the dormitory wing. The surname hit him just as it had the first time. Not because he had forgotten it, because his father was using it now as a tool.
"Hartley," Sir Alastair repeated. "That name seems to crop up in the school records with surprising regularity."
The headmaster cleared his throat.
"Miss Hartley is one of our most promising pupils," he acknowledged.
Her name is also on the preliminary Cavendish list."
Matt felt something in him tighten like a string.
"So," his father continued, "we find ourselves in a situation where the name that once appeared beside your downfall may appear again, this time beside your failure." He steepled his fingers. "I trust you understand why we cannot allow that."
"We cannot" meant you must not.
"If the committee decides otherwise," he said evenly, "we will have to reconsider any further investment in your education, and in you at all."
Matt was not surprised. He had already read that sentence. His father had sent it in a letter, without witnesses. Now he was repeating it aloud, with the headmaster as official audience.
Once he had threatened him with boarding schools, with locks on the doors, with therapists, with temporary separation from the family. Now he was talking about cutting the line off altogether.
The old grip closed around his stomach. Memories of the reform school doors locking, the cold metal of the bed frame, the too loud coughing in the dark, all in one rush.
And threaded through it, Hartley on institutional paper, her name like a signature under what had followed. Long before the report there had been another image. The corridor, 3rd year at St. Oswald's, him late for class, barging in too loudly as she stood by the notice board, a sheaf of papers in her hands. A boy behind him had thrown out a spiteful remark about people like her, without a crest, without a name, not belonging here.
"Careful," Matt had cut in, taking his place beside him. "If she doesn't belong, you certainly don't. The crest on your blazer won't make up for what you're missing, and Hartley's the only person who knows how to drag you through next term."
He had known Rose differently then. She spent evenings in the library with him, with unnatural patience, going over geometry when he couldn't scrape a pass. She helped him, but she also bailed out half their year, including the same boy who'd just made fun of her.
Her notes had circulated through the dorms like contraband currency because no one else could be bothered to take them. She'd smiled then, briefly, a wary sort of gratitude. Then she'd shrugged, as if it were nothing. Maybe that was why the name in the report had hurt more. Because for all that, Rose had been the one who helped, not the one who turned people in. "Matthew," his father's voice snapped him back.
"Do we understand one another?" Sir Alistair asked. "If Cavendish goes to that girl, we will no longer be able to pretend your future aligns with our expectations."
"That girl."
"We understand," Matt said, feeling the words go through his throat like something foreign. The conversation lasted a few more minutes. Demands, plans, dates. When he left the office, the corridor was empty. He pulled his tie off without even loosening it first, his vision slightly blurred.
He entered his room without turning the light on. The door slammed harder than he intended. For a second, he just stood there, not entirely sure where he was.
Then he saw the reading list on the desk, left by someone as motivation. At the top, Horace. The same Horace Rose hid behind when she faced the world. Before he knew what he was doing, he grabbed the book and hurled it at the wall. It bounced off the plaster, pages bursting like white birds. A glass followed, shattering. A pen that had stopped working snapped in his fingers, ink marking his skin.
He was breathing as if he'd been running. For a moment, he wanted to smash everything. Bed, desk, window. He stopped halfway.
If you wreck the room, someone will see. Someone will write it down. Someone will use it. In truth, he had heard nothing new. Everything meant to hurt had already arrived by post. This visit was damage assessment, not a conversation. Confirmation that the threat on paper now had a face and a witness in academic robes.
He slid down the wall until he sat on the floor.
An exam timetable sheet stuck to the sole of his shoe.
Hartley pulsed in his head like pain.
He no longer knew whether he hated her more for the fact that once they had had something like a connection, or for the fact that later she had signed off on his fall. He knew only that if he was going to survive this year, he would have to work out who she actually was before the system used her name against him again.
Maybe that was why he watched her in lessons. Maybe that was why he asked Caroline how the others treated her.
He wanted to know whether Hartley was a weapon someone had driven into his back or a loose grenade that had gone off in both their hands.